All right, good morning. Welcome to Focus Friday today. My name is Derek Morales, and I'm one of the managing directors for Partners in Business. We're excited to have Kevin Parker here today, but before we get into that, we'll have a few announcements. So immediately following the Leadership Forum, we'll have the Industry Insights panel. Now it's going to be featuring recruiters from Silicon Slopes tech companies. We'll have Scott Hammond from Adobe, we'll have Ashley Nelson from Entrada, Morgan Powell from HireVue, Chris Johnson and Casey Nave from Lucid Software, Ali Agee, Adam Finch from SoFi, and lastly Kang Vo from Vivint Solar. If you've ever considered a career in Utah Tech, it would be absolute insanity to not attend that Industry Insights panel with so many recruiters there. Tonight we will have Business Council hosting the Huntsman Gala. That's going to begin at 8 p.m. It's formal dress. There'll be hors d'oeuvres, Italian sodas, social just networking. So you won't want to miss out on the opportunity to form some new bonds and strengthen existing ones tonight at the Huntsman Gala. For next week, Focus Friday will feature Alan Hall. He is the founder of MarketStar, who does a lot of advertising for companies such as Pinterest. We're excited about that. Following Focus Friday next week, that leadership forum, we'll have our Excel Tech Talk. Michon Covington will be, he's the director of finance at eForce Software, and he will be presenting 2 Excel techniques that every single professional needs to know to be a force in the workplace. Lunch will also be provided. You won't want to miss out on that and fall behind in the workplace. Next Friday is also the Accounting Career Exploration Trip. They will be visiting companies such as Squire, KPMG, as well as the FBI. So if you're interested in any of those companies or in a career in accounting, we encourage you to check that out. Lastly, each of you got a slip of paper before you came in today and had the opportunity to enter into a raffle. I'm sure you're all interested in what that's about. We'll be giving away 2 passes to the Silicon Slopes Tech Summit this spring. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Silicon Slopes Tech Summit is, direct your attention to one of the screens, and we have a short video for you. So we're pretty excited about that. Speakers last year included Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor, a book that's really impacted me. She was also a leadership coach at Google, as well as CEOs from incredible tech companies here that are also awesome presenters. So if you'd like the opportunity to win one of 2 entries into that tech summit in January, make sure that you stick around for the Industry Insights panel. The drawing will be held right after the Industry Insights panel, and you must be present to win. So now for the main event, what you've all been waiting for, Kevin Parker. Kevin graduated from Clarkson University now in Potsdam, New York. He was telling me that Potsdam is as far north as you can get without entering Canada, and so the saying goes that it's not the end of the world, but if you stood on a chair, you could see the end of the world from Potsdam. He has a 14-year-old daughter, and him and his wife were actually en route to California when they decided to catch some skiing at Deer Valley Ski Resort. Hopped off a lift and realized, hey, this is a pretty fun place to be, and they ended up sticking around. So we're honored to have Kevin here today, so please join me in giving him a Huntsman welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Those of you who don't know me, I'm BJ Conn. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here in the school. It's my pleasure to have Kevin with us today. Kevin, as you probably know from the bio that's on the seat in front of you, he's the CEO and Chairman of the Board of HireVue. Real quick bit of background. So HireVue is a industry-leading provider of technology related to hiring and recruiting. The company started back in 2004 as merely, I will call it, a video interview platform. But over the last 13 years, HireVue has evolved to provide a much more comprehensive platform of technology that organizations can use to not only do video interviews, but do evaluative reviews of those interviews. They're leading the way in terms of incorporating that video technology with artificial intelligence and various other elements of data science to provide employers with a broader picture of potential candidates for employment. So this is a really exciting technology. It's HireVue is sort of leading the way in terms of the technology, and as we'll also hear later on this morning from Kevin, there are huge opportunities ahead for the organization, as well as no doubt a number of challenges that they're going to have to overcome. HireVue is a platform that's being used now by over 600 customers globally, and we're talking about organizations such as Nike, Deloitte, Intel, Honeywell. We're talking major Fortune 100, Fortune 500 corporations who, in their efforts to reach out to the talent that is out there, they're looking for solutions that will help them to reach the kind of people that they're looking for, and to be able to evaluate them in a way that's not only effective but efficient. So this is a very significant technology, a very significant organization that Kevin is playing a role with. A couple of things I do want to mention about Kevin. Kevin started out as an accountant, but has had a long career and leadership in the technology space for the last 15-20 years. Back in 2012, he was the recipient of Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year Award in the software area, which I think speaks volumes about his leadership, but also the history he has within the tech space. I should also add that HireVue as an organization has for the last several years provided a license for us here in the Huntsman School so that we can use their technology as a developmental tool for our students. So we are deeply appreciative of that gift that you provided to us. It really makes a huge impact on our efforts to develop students for the workplace. So with that, let's get into the heart of why we're here. Let's, if we can, maybe go from a very early stage in your life. As we think about leadership, and the focus of today's time really is about leadership and leadership identity. Who are some of what were some of the earliest leadership lessons that you learned? Who were some of the primary influencers of you as you think about where your leadership identity began and how it's evolved over the years?
Good question, but before you, I'm delighted to be here and glad to be part of this process. And back to where I graduated from college in 1981, so from my university, like right after the end of the Civil War. So we stayed involved in technology that long. It's hard to believe. Some great stories there. In terms of leadership, I've had a lot of great mentors. And one of the things that I look back on my career, and I got to work with a lot of terrific people, and some great bosses, some not so great bosses. We learn a lot from each of them at the end of the day. Probably one of the most influential folks, two people who were most influential on me. One was a VP of sales. I had an opportunity to be a sales controller, so I started my career right at Huntsman. After about 5 or 6 years, moved into the technology space, working for a sales controller. Oh, we got to turn on my. You normally don't have to appropriate curves.
That's going to make it better, isn't it? Oh, it's on. There we go. And had an opportunity to work for a VP of sales as a sales controller for an international organization. And two things about that were exciting. One, I was working with somebody that was actually on a frontline basis, working with customers and selling to customers every day. And accounting can be a bit abstract sometimes. You can sort of be looking at the debits and credits and sort of not really sort of having them come alive to you. And this was the first time I was working alongside a sales team, working with customers, and understood the impact of pricing, understood the impacts of discounting and a variety of things like that. And so the accounting actually came more to life with me. And it was also a very operationally focused business, and I had a lot more time with customers, as I said, with salespeople, and that really sort of opened the aperture, if you will, for me in terms of my role and what I really enjoyed. I love the finance side of it, but it was more exciting to me when it really came to life. Probably the other big mentor was Dave Duffield. Dave was the founder of PeopleSoft. He's the founder of Workday, or co-founder of Workday today, and just a remarkably gracious, sort of thoughtful, very, very generous human being, sort of a great humanitarian. And I worked with Dave side by side through some very tough situations, through a hostile takeover and a variety of things like that. And my respect for Dave as a human being only grew over time. And I've tried to pattern a lot of what I think of leadership as Dave. And Dave is two things. One, he's an incredibly gracious, kind, thoughtful humanitarian. And he's as competitive as you can imagine at the end of the day. So it's hard to see those two things being in the same person. But Dave embodied a lot of that, and a lot of that style from PeopleSoft I've brought I've tried to bring to HireVue. I brought to Deltek when I was there as CEO. And so those are two people I look back and think, boy, I was very, very lucky to have worked with both of those individuals.
So in his introduction, Derek mentioned that you went to school, Potsdam University, on the edge of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about your experience there. What were the things you took away from your college experience? In what ways did you engage in activities that helped to shape your sense of leadership?
Sure. Somebody asked me why I went to Clarkson University, which is, as I said, about as far north in New York as you can go and still be in the United States. And the honest answer is I got in. I wasn't a particularly good high school student. I was probably a C student in high school. Clarkson is, as I've described, as sort of a very high-end vocational school. The one responsibility you have going to Clarkson is get a job. That's why I went to Clarkson. I needed a job. I had to get a job. Up till then, I had shown no aptitude at anything. And at Clarkson, you can major in three things. You can be a hockey player, and Clarkson's got one of the best college hockey programs. You can be an engineer, or you can be an accountant. And the honest answer, I was too slow to play hockey at that level. I wasn't smart enough to be an engineer, so there I was in accounting. And I realized that accounting and my experience at Clarkson was my way out of upstate New York. Upstate New York's beautiful, but I wanted to go see the world. I wanted to get out and do things. And so I graduated, at the top of my class in accounting and surprised everybody, especially my parents at that point, and translated that into a job in Boston at Price Waterhouse. And so that was my ticket out. That was my entree into the world, and I only had that one shot, so I made sure it counted. The exciting thing about Price Waterhouse, when I moved to Boston, I didn't know a soul in Boston. I just moved to Boston because that was a great city to be in. And the public accounting experience was fabulous. It was like a mini MBA program because I was at different clients every 90 days, sort of seeing different leadership styles, different businesses, different types of companies. I had a hospital as a client. I had a pizza oven manufacturer as a client. I had a ski area as a client. So you're sort of getting this broad view into the economy, and I got to absorb and see a lot of things. And as a result of that, I had a technology company. It was a client. Pretty cool stuff, this technology. I think I'll get involved in that. But you just saw so many things and worked with so many different people, and it was transformative to my experience. So it was Clarkson to get a job, and the job I got was pretty foundational for my career.
So as you think back to those days in college and you thought about how your career was going to play out, can you recall what was going through your mind?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a partner at a public accounting firm. that was my career projection. It was a great experience, and Price Waterhouse was like playing baseball for the New York Yankees for me. It was where you wanted to be. If you could get a career in public accounting, you wanted to be at Price Waterhouse, and that was when we still had 8 accounting firms to choose from, and now it's obviously different. And I got there. It was a great experience, but at the end of the day, I realized, you know what? I want to do more. My dad was a tax partner at an accounting firm, and I hate taxes. I can't do my own taxes today. And I got to accounting. I thought, this is really interesting stuff, and then I realized, you know what? I don't want to be a partner. I want to go do something else. I don't know what that is, but I've got to try something new and try something different, and so I left there and moved to Southern California. Just for a job at the end of the day.
So you left Price Waterhouse, you went through a number of iterations as your career evolved. Talk us through what were some of the key factors that motivated you at each of those junctures in your career. Why did you switch? What was the opportunity? What was the excitement factor for you as you made those changes?
Yeah, great question. And I've had a lot of different jobs, and you know, as I said earlier, you know, in the pre-meeting, I've been laid off, I've been fired, I was unemployed for a year. I've had a lot of different experiences along the way. But every time I took a new job, I wasn't leaving the job I generally had a pretty good job, but it was, boy, this is new, this is interesting, this is different, I'm not sure I can do this. You know, when I moved to Southern California, it was to be the international controller for a technology company. And they said, look, we need you to travel the world setting up subsidiaries and setting up distribution. And I had never really been out of upstate New York. I had never traveled internationally. I didn't have a passport. I certainly don't speak any foreign languages with any aptitude. But it was an experiment. Could I do it? Could I push myself in that direction? And every time I've taken a new role, it's been, boy, there's something new here to learn. There's something exciting here to learn that I'm not sure I can do it. You know, I'm outside my comfort zone. And it's generally worked out. You know, you sort of rise to the occasion and you learn new things and you meet new people. But every time I've transitioned, it's been, you know, for the opportunity to learn something new and try something new. I never had it in my mind, not once did I ever think I was going to be a CEO. I didn't have that as my career goal. As long as I was doing something interesting, it was satisfying to me. But it all worked out that the skills I developed along the way from all these different adventures and all these different things put me in a good position to be a CEO, and I've enjoyed it ever since.
So I'm glad you brought up the notion of the international assignment. You know, we talked about this earlier this morning. What to you has been the value of some of those experiences? What have been some of the greatest takeaways that you have personally had by virtue of those experiences? And what advice would you give to students about the importance of such assignments?
Yeah, a couple of things. And that was kind of a nested set of questions, so I'll forget the last one. You can remind me when we get there. There's something about being in a business and having the opportunity to think globally. You know, and when I've always enjoyed organizations that have an international exposure to them, the ability to think about different economies, different companies, different societies, and the way they might be using your technology at any point in time. And I've always really enjoyed that, so I've been attracted to that. And so anytime there was an opportunity to do something internationally, I've always jumped on a plane to go. It's like, yeah, let's go. You know, sure, Japan for 24 hours, I'm on. You know, sign me up. I'd love to go. And as a result of that, I think I have and particularly a sort of unique view of how companies grow globally, how do we hire globally, and appreciated to a great degree the diversity of thought that having a global view of the world really brings to me as an individual and to businesses as well. So it's incredibly exciting, and you come back from those adventures so enriched and have such a different take on even the day-to-day world that we live in. So I would encourage anybody to do it. If you have a chance to work overseas, do it. If you have a chance to work for a company that can send you overseas. I never had the opportunity to work overseas for years at a time, and that's the one regret in my career I do have. But whenever there was an opportunity to do something as an assignment, yeah, go to Australia. Never been to Australia. Go to South America. Yeah, never been there, but I'm sure I can figure it out when I get there. And it's been a great source of satisfaction for me to work globally in that regard.
Were there any times when you were overseas and you said to yourself, "What did I get myself into?"
Oh God, yeah. It's like trying to figure out how to pump gas in Japan. It's like, all right. Can't read anything, can't do anything. I used to work for a Japanese company. I won't tell you who it was, Fujitsu, but the CFO at Fujitsu. I was the VP of Finance or the CFO for their American operations, and the CFO at Fujitsu, I'm convinced he did it intentionally, would ask me to have a meeting 5 o'clock on Friday night whenever I was there. Now, he knew that the last flight home for the U.S., I lived on the West Coast, left at 3:30. So, and the next flight home wasn't until 3:30 on Sunday, and so he said, I need to see you at 5 o'clock, and it was never about anything important or anything else. I think he just wanted to sort of play with me a little bit and make me stay there. But you wake up on Saturday morning or Sunday morning by yourself in a hotel room, you don't know anybody in town, and you think, oh my God, what am I going to do? My flight's not for 48 hours, I'm stuck here in this hotel room, I have no friends around to do anything. And you just kind of pick yourself up and you get out and you start walking around and you say, hey, let's go see a temple. Let's go, get on the train and go somewhere. Let's try and find something. And the exposure to people outside of your work life, the exposure to different cultures was an amazing experience. But there were plenty of times I'm like, oh my God, I want to go home. how do I get home? I got to quit this job. This is terrible. I used to go to Japan. I've been in Japan about 50 or 60 times over the years. And it's the one place on the planet that the minute the plane landed in Tokyo, I'm like, okay, how do I get home early? how do I figure out how to get home early? But every time I was forced to stay there, it was an incredible experience. It's a really enriching experience to do those sorts of things.
So are there some specific illustrations of leadership style that you observed in some of those overseas assignments that you could not have learned had you just stayed at home?
I think so. I think, every culture and every organization has their own decision-making style. And we're on the subject of Japan. We'll talk about Japan for a minute. It's a very consensus-oriented decision-making style. It's, in Japanese, it's called ringi. And you have to, if all of us were trying to make a decision about something, we'd have to individually contribute to that decision, and we weren't going to move forward until all of us made that decision together. And it's incredibly slow. It's like working at the Department of Motor Vehicles some days. It just slows things down. And as an American who can be pretty impetuous and like, let's go do it, let's go do it, let's go do it, you sort of get very frustrated in that regard. But you come away from that thinking, you know what, there's value in consensus. There's value in going through a consensus building process. And so that kind of tempered my decision, my leadership style over time. It's like, all right, let's slow down. Let's build some consensus here. I could sort of, as CEO, make a decision and enforce it, and you wind up realizing that, the more consensus we build around things, around decisions, the better off we are. And so I very deliberately learned a lot from that. I was still very frustrated by it, but learned something from it at the same time.
So 5 years ago, you're at a point in your life where you're starting to say you can start to take your foot off the gas pedal, and then New York to California and pretty much everything in between, and then this opportunity opens up in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us a little bit, if you would, about what motivated you to get involved with HireVue. What were your thoughts? Obviously, it's a very different environment, landscape to where you've been. Your thought process in signing on with HireVue, and what motivated you by this opportunity?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I moved here 4 or 5 years ago without a job. I was going to ski and mountain bike, and I was on a couple of corporate boards and got a call to come talk to the team at HireVue. And what I found was, as you probably have seen, a really incredible technology, and in a technology that I believe is going to revolutionize the way people get hired. 10 years from now, you're going to see somebody that's got a resume, and you're going to go, oh my gosh, you're still doing it that way. How cute. It's going to be like seeing a cell phone in an 80s movie. It's just going to look so out of place because the resumes are a flawed and a terrible way to find talent. They're a terrible way to hire people. And so that idea that we can sort of democratize the hiring process and make it open to more people in ways that aren't there before was really empowering. I felt like that was a really clear mission. If we were doing sort of middleware for database managers, I don't know if I would have been as passionate about it. But this is something that's going to change the world in a very, very positive way. A very positive way for candidates and a very positive way for employers.
So let's build on that for a second if we can. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, when HireVue first started as an organization, it was really just a video platform. What have been some of the key transformations that the technology has gone through? Where is this going?
So the technology really did start as a way to interview over distance, and the original use case was let's save time and money. People don't have to travel, and that was the original thought process. But we've moved so far past that, and I talk to our companies today, there are a couple of things that are really valuable to them. One, they're opening up the talent pool. They're interviewing more broadly than they ever have before, and they can reach more candidates than they ever could before because time and distance isn't getting in the way. They're improving their diversity. The fact that they can interview as broadly and the interviews are on demand makes them have a more diverse talent pool at the end of the day. And they're very, very focused on consistency. And they're trying to take away a lot of the human biases that come into the interviewing process to really improve diversity. Everybody's got the same experience. Everybody's getting asked the same questions. And they're trying to take sort of the implicit favoritism or bias out of the process for the benefit of them and for the benefit of the candidates at the end of the day. I was in New York for the last 3 days talking to a number of potential customers and investment banks and things, and they're like, we're tired of going back to the same old schools. We're really tired of that. How can we talk to more people? And HireVue is the enabling technology that gets them that goal.
So can you talk a little bit about how that technology is being used? What is it about the platform that gives employers the opportunity to see what they're looking for?
Well, as I said, it opens the aperture in a very positive way. And there are people we'll probably do on an average day 11,000 interviews today around the world in 180 countries, 32 languages. So you're looking very, very broadly for talent in a way that you never could before. And because we can engage with candidates and customers can engage with candidates when it's most convenient for them, a lot of the logistical challenges go to the side. And so there's a real benefit to both sides of the process here. As they're thinking about how to construct that and how to use artificial intelligence in new ways, they're looking at how do I screen profiles, and they believe resumes are bad. The number of times they've invited people in that have terrific resumes that ultimately end up being terrible candidates isn't very positive, and they feel like they're missing people because they're looking at resumes in a very bad way. And so they feel like having almost a conversation with a candidate is a much better way to find people.
So I'm sure one of the factors that the students are asking themselves is, oh my goodness, somebody has seen me, and they have on their schedule the ability to evaluate everything about my expression, everything about my presence. How does the technology, let me back up, what should the students know about in terms of how they can position themselves so that they can be effective in that space?
It's a great question, and look, these aren't meant to be screen tests. Companies aren't looking for actors and actresses and with great stage presence. That's not the goal at all. They're looking for you, and I think that's if I had to have one overwhelming message from our 6 or 7 customers, is they're trying to find you, and this is the best way they know how to reach out and find top-level candidates and find you without having to travel. So the motivation is very, very sincere. But it's not meant to be a test. It's an opportunity for you to tell your story in a very positive way. We've got a database of 5 or 6 million interviews today, and as I share with people, if I gave you access to that database today and just let you watch interviews with the sound off, so you weren't hearing anything anyone was saying, what you'd see most often is people smiling. They're telling their story. They're having a good experience. They're getting a chance to interview for a job they otherwise might not have had. And so it's really meant to be a great way to find the best talent they can as quickly as they possibly can. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's honestly not meant to be a test. And I know you've got access to it here on campus. Take a few interviews, practice. You'll get used to it pretty quickly. I've taken interviews, I've recorded questions, and there's something about the process that seems pretty daunting, but once you get in the middle of it, hey, it's not that hard.
So you almost can't have a conversation these days when you talk about technology without the issue of privacy also coming up. What are some of the key challenges you face there? How do you navigate that minefield?
So it's a great question. We take the privacy component incredibly seriously, and we've got an entire information security team. We're probably undergoing a privacy audit today from one of our customers almost every week of the year. So all of our data, we store no data on site. It's all up at Amazon Web Services. I don't even have access to interviews. So we take that responsibility very, very seriously. We're getting ready. There's some new privacy regulations coming out in Europe in this spring called GDPR that we're actually well prepared for. But we're doing interviews for people that have that have a great deal of focus on privacy, and as you might imagine, we share that focus. So it's something we take very seriously.
So where do we go from here? What's the next frontier as we look at the need to attract high quality talent and leveraging technology to do that?
So there's a couple of really interesting things on the horizon and that we're working with our customers, and one of them actually centers around campus. And can we do a better job of matching candidates to job? Could we create a generic HireVue interview and using artificial intelligence and our algorithms to say, you know what, these 5 companies would be the best companies for you to apply to. These 5 jobs might be really interesting for you. And our companies on the other side are saying, help us find talent, help us match talent. Unilever is a big customer. They did a really interesting thing this year. They've, with HireVue, they're interviewing very broadly in Europe, and they've actually told candidates, don't apply for a job. Introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself. Take a few cognitive tests, take a HireVue interview, and we will actually match you to the job that we think is best for you. And I'm sure as you're looking at jobs and you're looking at applying at different companies, the job profiles, the job specifications can almost be opaque. You know, it's like, I don't know, this seems interesting, I guess I could do this. And companies are realizing that's a terrible way to match talent with opportunity. So Unilever, I think, is on the cutting edge of saying, don't apply for a job, do some work with us, introduce yourself, take a few tests, and we'll start to steer you in the right direction. They've gotten a lot better at matching people with careers and opportunities based on their skill sets and based on their personality and their profiles.
Great. I think we're almost about ready to sort of transition over to the students. But before we do that, you know, if there was one nugget from your, you know, long career that you would share with the students about how to situate themselves for success professionally, what might that be?
You know, I'll go back to a piece of advice my dad gave me. I remember sitting on the porch at our house in upstate New York one day, and my dad was leaving for work, and he was a tax partner at Pete Marwick Mitchell at the time. And I said, Dad, I'd really love to do what you do. And he looked at me straight in the eye and goes, yeah, you'd never work that hard. and he drove off. That was the entire conversation. Man. And to this day, I remember that conversation. And at that point in my life, it was so absolutely accurate that it just cut right through me. It's like, all right, I get it. And you know, I have this sort of inner voice in my head that says, I'm never going to be the smartest kid in class, but I can work harder than anybody else. And that's the driving ethos that's sort of been with me my whole career. I wake up every morning thinking, all right, I'm going to fail today. So what am I going to do? How am I going to account for that? And what am I going to do differently? How can I work just a little bit harder to make sure that we do what we need to do today? So that's my advice my dad gave me anyway.
Great piece of wisdom. Great piece of wisdom. I think we are about time. We got some time now to turn it over to the audience for questions. So do we have somebody who wants to start us off?
Great, so just please raise your hand. I'll come to you, then you can stand, say your name and major, and ask a question.
I will tell you we have a rule, we have company meetings quite often, and the rule we have is anything's on the table. I'm glad to talk about anything, but I'd prefer we not leave here thinking, boy, I really wish Kevin had talked about X, because sitting up here, I have no idea what X is. So if you want to talk about something, glad to talk about it and glad to have anything on the table.
I just have a question on how likely it is that HireVue will collaborate with LinkedIn or different programs like that are also working towards matching candidates towards jobs. So is that something you're looking towards, or?
So we have a partnership with LinkedIn today. You know, I think the gulf between us and LinkedIn is we tend to be very company-centric and work on the talent side. LinkedIn is very candidate-centric, and they consider their members, which we all are in LinkedIn, to be sort of their community. And so we work with LinkedIn. We're having some conversations about this, about where we might go together. We're not competitive with each other. In fact, if you were to look at a HireVue interview, most of the time you'd see a link to their LinkedIn profile right in the interview. So that's the way that recruiters can access all that information. So we'll see where it all goes. It's a pretty exciting day when we can figure out what we might do together, though.
My name is Jordan Price. I'm studying business administration and human resource management. My question is, the platform that HireVue uses is obviously cutting edge for recruiting, for hiring. What potential or possibilities are there for training, for meetings internally, maybe talent retention, anything like that? Is there a plan to expand into anything like that?
There is, and in fact, the sales school here, the folks that are teaching sales skills actually use a product of ours called Coach, which uses that same on-demand video methodology to deliver training. And so you can take training 24 hours a day on a particular topic that you might want to be trained on. And we use it in selling situations so that if you want to practice, overcoming a selling objection might be a very common one. Well, here's how you do it. And record yourself doing it. That way your manager, who might be 2,000 miles away, can watch you do that overnight and say, that was a great job, you did really well on that. Or, at this part of it, you need to change your vocabulary a little bit. So we're looking at ways to use that on-demand technology and, again, artificial intelligence to train people and to bring people in onboarding into companies, sales training, and a variety of things like that. It's early to see where it all goes, but there's a lot of applications that we're looking at.
be roaming around, just stick your hand up.
Hi. So earlier you said you weren't expecting to ever be a CEO. Are there any hard skills you wish you would have picked up earlier to prepare you for a position you weren't planning on going into?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things I've always remarked on is, as I've gone on in my career, how much the ability to work with people makes an enormous difference. And whether it's, everybody's got their own style. But my education was primarily technical. And as I've gone through my career, I've spent so little time doing that and so much of my time working with people, whether it's internationally or in our office or with customers. But people skills and the ability to understand what motivates people and how to lead people and manage people is something that you just can't learn enough of. You're never done learning. And so the more you can include that in your day-to-day life, even if you may be majoring in accounting like I did, the better off you're going to be at the end of the day. That's what it all comes down to. We're all working with people and we're all working together, and the more you learn about that, the better.
I'm Zach Garside. I'm a marketing major, and I want to ask, as a CEO, leading people within the company, what's the greatest challenge you face within HireVue as a leader, and how do you overcome and face that challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we think about that a lot as a leadership team. And one of the challenges that many small companies have is staying focused. We do a lot of work around making sure we really understand, for all 250 of us, what our number one, number two, and number three priorities are. Sometimes the ability to change or adapt is actually limited by just the number of hours in the day and the number of people you have. So if you have 30 different projects running at the same time or 40 different activities running at the same time, none of them are going to work. And so the one thing I've learned over time is stay focused, establish really clear priorities, and make sure we're reinforcing those. Make sure we're measuring those as a team, and we understand what I describe as our North Star really is. So that's probably the one thing I'd say is a challenge for any small company, and we work on that every single day. I think if you were to talk to the team, I think we'd have a very clear sense of what our priorities are for the next year.
All right, Mr. Parker, my name's Q. I'm a business administration and marketing major, and my question for you is, you traveled across the world and such, what is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from a different country? Because you talked about like the in Japan helped you like take a step back, and what was it? Thank you. Concise about like consensus. Thank you. Yeah. About the situation. What would be the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from a different country?
Great question, Q. And Mr. Parker was my father's name. I'm Kevin. Okay. I'd go back to Japan, and just in terms of the business culture there is so very, very different, and I had to learn how to motivate people in that culture and how to make my clear imperatives as an American, because we're always sort of driving, and sort of temper that and figure out a way to build and get a team to work on a consensus basis in a culture that was so foreign and so different than anything I'd known. That took me a while to figure that out. That was a really interesting lesson, a tough lesson, but a good one at the same time.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm an MMIS MHR student. What would you recommend would be the best platform for students to build their portfolio, to build a presence, to help companies notice them and notice their skills?
I think LinkedIn is the sort of the standard today, and I recognize that the LinkedIn, not every student has an enormous profile to put on LinkedIn. that's probably the number one thing. I don't have a sort of an articulate suggestion beyond that, but I know most of our companies really start with LinkedIn.
Hey Kevin, my name is Braden. I'm a marketing student here. I'm really interested to know what HireVue's story was on how they started, specifically on financing. So did the original founders bootstrap it? I mean, that's Utah, right? Entrepreneurial ventures. But did you go seek venture capital? If so, like, what did your cap table look like? What was all? Could you maybe talk about it a little bit?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And it's actually, and I probably should have shared this story at the beginning. The sort of the origin of HireVue is actually pretty interesting. It was started by a guy named Mark Newman. Mark is a Utah native, was at school at Westminster, and Mark, more than anything, wanted to work at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs' second largest office in the U.S. was within sight of Mark Newman's dorm room, and he could not get an interview to save his life. And he was so frustrated, he got a bee in his bonnet and said, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to take away all their excuses. We're going to use video to do that. And so for the first 10 years or so, we were shipping webcams to people, and we were doing 50, 100,000 interviews a year, and we were shipping webcams to people. Mark pulled together financing, mostly from the sort of the angel community. We bootstrapped it, he bootstrapped it, I should say, for the first couple of years, and put together financing from the angel community. And as we've grown, we've raised about $93 million today. Our biggest investors right now are Sequoia out of Silicon Valley and TCV out of Silicon Valley. But as we've gone through, we've raised multiple rounds of things, so it's been a bit of a sort of an evolution over time. But it was, the classic story. And he started the company. His master's thesis was in entrepreneurship was about HireVue, and so this really came out of a master's thesis from school. No one was more happy when we signed Goldman Sachs as a customer than Mark was. So, kind of ironic.
Hi Kevin, my name is Bryce Hare. I am a mechanical engineering student. My question for you is, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice to anyone to having the most success in their life?
There's points in time I think my life is just to serve as a warning to others of what not to do. But I think that the answer is for me was do a lot of different things. I never had a job for more than 4 years in any one place. I've moved a lot. I've started out in Boston, moved to Southern California, moved to Silicon Valley, moved to Washington, D.C., now to Utah. And every experience has been a very positive one. Yeah, there were hard times along the way, but every experience has been a hard one. And every new company I joined, I learned something new from the people around me. And you just sort of absorb stuff like a sponge. And today when I'm hiring people, if somebody walks in the door and it's like, yeah, I've been 20 years at such and such a company, I'm like, boy, I don't know. Have you learned enough? Have you seen enough things? Have you had enough diversity to your career? So that would be my number one advice. The number 2 thing I think is don't get in love with a particular destination. I wanted to be when I started my career a partner in an accounting firm, and I'm as far from being a partner in an accounting firm, and not that there's anything wrong with that. It just wasn't the right thing for me, and so I never dreamed I'd be a CEO, and here we are. And so life intervenes in some really interesting ways, and sometimes, and you got to be really open to the opportunity, and set your course in one direction. Be open to making changes. Be open to trying new things, and over time you sort of narrow down. It's like, this is what I'm really passionate about, and so try that.
All right, we have time for one more question.
The really hard one's coming, right?
Yeah, hi, my name's Thomas. I'm a marketing major. And I guess my question is, my understanding is a lot of recruiting is done through connections within the company and networking. Does your service, is it going to sway that a little bit? So more, not like cold calling, but so hiring isn't so much through networking, but rather direct applications?
I will. So it's a great question, and that's in some places I think it still is that way in a lot of ways. But after being in, as I said, I was in New York, messed with 6 different investment banks, and with all the customers we've got, they hate that networking idea. It doesn't bring the best talent. You wind up with, hey, you played lacrosse, I played lacrosse, and you wind up with all these biases that we enter into the process that they don't want. They want the best talent they possibly can. And I was having this conversation with the head of HR at an investment bank yesterday, and just so what do we do about all these referrals? All the partners send us these folks, and we feel like we got to follow up on them. It's like, put them through the HireVue process. Don't give them any special advantage because it results in bad hiring at the end of the day. They're really focused on finding talent. And I'll maybe end with one thing that we didn't talk about. There's a school of thought. There's a great book written by Angela Duckworth called Grit. I don't know if you're familiar with that, if you've come across Grit. But most of large employers are realizing that grit and tenacity and stick-to-itiveness, if I can describe it that way, are such fundamental characteristics for success. They're less concerned about where you went to school. They're less concerned about what you did in an undergraduate degree. They're actually looking for people that have tenacity and grit, and that's the opposite of the whole networking thing. They're looking for people that can do the work, and so networking's only going to get so far.
Great, this has been phenomenal. So thanks for coming out, Kevin. We wanted to present him with our
thanks.